Dear listener, welcome into Other People's Shoes, Season 17, entitled Dear. This season, we venture into emotional territories as we explore words left unsent through this intimate process of writing a letter that was never meant to reach its recipient. The raw, unfiltered authenticity that speaks volumes in these letters. These unrevealed stories, confessions, and reflections held within these letters until now are powerful. Welcome to Dear, sincerely, Other People's Shoes.
That is right.
We're
We're
got
at
mail.
the mailbox again. Welcome into Other People's Shoes. I am Neil Matthews. Super excited that you've chosen to select this episode for whatever reason. Maybe it's because you heard that we were going to have a Swiftie on that maybe drew you in. Maybe it's because you're still trying to figure out how a cheetah ends up in a Miami Dolphins uniform. Or maybe it's you're reminiscing, as I was in the green room of old, of seeing the legendary two-sport athlete Bo Jackson running up the wall. Or maybe you're running out of a wall and you're maybe needing some help today. Well, stick around. We have an exciting show for you. All that foretold where our guest hails from today. I always like to tell you that. I think that's important. Help me welcome in my new friend, Jared. Jared, how are you today?
I'm doing well today. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. As I said, I love doing this. This is still fun to do. 5 years in, 200 and almost 300 episodes in. We're still loving it and doing it. I don't know about you. Anytime I get to sit behind this thing, it gets exciting. This being the microphone, to be clear. Us with this. We love to lead off every show with this question, and that's this. What size shoes do you wear?
I wear a 13. I have big feet.
Okay. Is there a style or brand that adorns your feet more than, say, others?
No, I am being introduced to all kinds of new brands that I'd never was aware of before. I'm wearing more police shoes. So it's not an Oxford, it's a tactical Oxford. I didn't know such a thing existed before.
Wow. A tactical Oxford.
Yes. It's just a dress shoe with a very aggressive tread.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I was going to say. Visually, I'm trying to picture that, and I'm struggling. And I like shoes,
Yeah,
but
you
I'm
got to
struggling.
have a lot of police shoes. They want leather shoes that can be polished to a shine. They also have to have just a little bit of army boot to them.
There's this amazing author. I keep saying that in hopes that maybe his team listens to the show. So that's why I lead with amazing author. But it is true. He really does write some good books. His name's Greg Horowitz. And we've actually reached out to him. And politely, they've said, Greg is in the middle of writing right now. So he can't come to the phone or the show right now. But if you'd like to leave a message with his publicist, we'll be sure to get it in his hand. Greg Horowitz writes these amazing books called Orphan X. It's a series. The main character wears original SWAT boots. And I've thought about, to help in my Greg Horowitz pursuit of having him come on my show, buy them. But they're not cheap. They're not cheap. I don't know if you have a line on that might be cheaper. Let me know. Getting into you, as I mentioned, you're in Kansas City. You have not been a Chiefs fan for the last 5 years. It's been a long time.
Yes, I've lived here my whole life.
Are you excited about the fandom that now the Chiefs are garnering with Taylor Swift and all her friends? It has now been proven, thanks to my good friend Dan Patrick, that the NFL season actually tailored the Chiefs' schedule to coincide with Taylor's schedule. I don't know if you knew that as a Chiefs fan, but that kind of bugged me a little bit as a sports fan.
That's overblown. That's overblown. The truth is that she sets her schedule to occupy stadiums before the NFL does. They have to schedule around her and several other large acts that occupy these stadiums, because these stadiums, if they just do NFL games, that's only 8 dates a year, 10 if you count preseason games. If you want to use that stadium effectively and make money, you've got to draw in people like Taylor Swift to come in and use your stadium. And so they get first dibs, which means every year that the Chiefs and every other NFL team are scheduling around major concerts that can happen in their venue. So that actually isn't new news. What is valuable is that Taylor Swift comes to Kansas City, which we are smack dab in the middle of flyover territory. She comes in and starts promoting local businesses. We've had a lot of economic growth because of that singer. I couldn't care less about Taylor Swift, but watching her come in and give a real shot in the arm to local businesses, I mean, that actually was immensely helpful. I mean, there are people moving to Kansas City because of that influence. And that's really kind of awesome. Kansas City is a great place to live. We just don't have great weather. We have one good week in the spring and one good week in the fall. And the rest of the time it's either too hot or too cold. Other than the Chiefs to root for, not a lot else that would draw people here. Once they're here, a lot of people discover this is a great place to live, and I love living in the Midwest, and the people are wonderful, and I want to raise my kids here. We don't have the mountains or the beaches that would just naturally draw somebody.
I think that's fantastic that she has done those things to help the local economy. I think that's huge. I really do. I value that as well. Coming from a small town area that we're in Southern Oregon, it's nice. I mean, if Taylor Swift came here, I don't think our community would know what to do. I think most people would probably be out in protest. Nonetheless, there we are. Carrie Underwood came here a couple of years ago. The joke is as soon as she was done with her show, she literally had a car waiting for her and they whisked her away to the airport. Like, she didn't stick around. She didn't hang out. She didn't sign autographs. She was here, gone, and done. And I was like, wow, that was 3 hours of our economy money we'll never see again.
Yeah, it's nice to see famous people invest, because years ago we had Joe Montana as a quarterback of the Chiefs after his time in San Francisco. And he was here for a few years. As he was leaving, he said he loved living in Missouri. Well, Kansas City, Missouri is where the stadium is at, but he lived in Kansas. And I don't know if that was just a slip of the tongue or if he didn't know that his house was in the state of Kansas. A lot of times these famous people, they don't give a lot of attention. They only live here part-time. They come in, they zoom out, and they're gone again, never to visit again. It's nice to see somebody actually buy houses here and actually invest, get involved. I had no natural affinity to Taylor Swift. Feel better about her now.
Well, that's awesome. I'm so glad that she's made you a Swiftie.
Almost. I still couldn't pick one of her songs out of a lineup, but yeah.
I could, only because I have a 16-year-old daughter who's obsessed with her. And then my wife joined the wagon and they listened to the whole album one afternoon as we're driving somewhere. Who is this? This is absolute trash. My wife looks at me and goes, this is Taylor Swift.
Yeah, I got on Spotify and listened to her top 5 songs.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell the difference. They were all exactly the same to me.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, man, none of this appeals to me at all, but whatever.
I will admit my favorite Taylor Swift song is, she has a song about Tim McGraw. When you hear Tim McGraw or something like that, it might be Tim McGraw. She wrote it in her early years, and I like her earlier stuff. I will admit that. I love Taylor's earlier stuff. I thought she was she is very talented as far as that goes. Again, going back to our conversation in the green room, we love stories. I think we as people love stories. We love a song telling you a story. Don McLean's Miss America Pie. As long as that song it's a great song because it tells a story. Billy Joel, We Didn't Start the Fire. Great song. It tells a story. Jared, on to you. Speaking of stories, that was all to say and set up this. Help us with this. We've been in this series of Dear, writing a letter to somebody that for whatever reason we can't send it. Maybe they've passed. In some cases, maybe we don't want to, or in other cases, maybe we don't have the courage or the gumption to send said letter. I mean, it's easy nowadays to be a keyboard warrior. We all kind of know that phrase and that expression. My idea was kind of putting pen to pad or maybe even keyboard to iPhone. In my case, I actually led off this series with my own letters, which people have come back to me and said, wow, Neil, that was the most emotional, heart-wrenching episode you've ever had. And I said, Q, I think we've had others. I'm not the only hard story. Lead all that to say, why write your letter and who was it to?
Well, I struggled with this. It was an interesting exercise. I didn't expect it to be difficult, but it was. I decided to write to an officer who took his own life. And I'm a police chaplain. I deal with police officers every day. I counsel with them. I ride with them. I visit them at the station. I spend time with them. I learn to love them. They're not always very lovable. Police officer will push you away to see if you can be pushed away. They don't expect people to like them, especially in the last handful of years. There's been a lot of animosity toward police officers, a lot of disrespect, a lot of mistreatment. They do an incredibly difficult job that's extremely stressful. The average person will have 2 or 3 critical incidents in their life where they encounter a dead body, where their life is at risk. A police officer may encounter 800 in his career. He's having a lifetime full of trauma every week in, week out, for years on end. It leads to a higher alcoholism rate. It leads to a higher divorce rate. It leads to a higher suicide rate. I tried to write a letter, and I wrote several versions of it to an officer, just expressing my regret that I'm not able to. It's a hypothetical officer. I didn't want to get specific. Even that was hard for me. Like I said, I didn't expect that to be as difficult as it was. Trying to express how bad we feel that we couldn't have made him feel comfortable to ask for help. These guys, all they do is help others. All they do is put themselves on the line. They may not be very lovable sometimes. They are exercising an act of love to help other people all the time. And then they just swallow all of that trauma, all of that grief. It expresses itself in a lot of really negative behaviors. It often destroys the relationship, it isolates them, and sometimes it leads to them taking their life. That was very difficult.
On a conscious level, I think we as society, I know me as a person, we know suicide happens. We know veterans, as an example. I think of them as the same kind of type of service people as a police officer or as a paramedic. Or that's at least my belief. I look at them kind of in, the same kind of category. I hate to categorize people in that same thought, and I think you're with me on that. The challenge that I run into is we know it happens as a society. We just don't want to look at it. We kind of just want to ignore it and think, oh, that's somebody else's issue. That's their issue. That's their family's issue. Suicide for me is still a hard one. Again, for me personally, I've had the thought process, is it selfish? And I've had guests come on who have walked through suicide, maybe of a loved one. And I've asked that very question. I said, do you think your loved one's act was the selfish act, or was it about them act? I don't know how else to say selfish. There's not a lot of other words I can come up with. Thesaurus, that's still a tough word for me. The thesaurus doesn't give me a lot. You've walked through all kinds of good, bad, ugly, especially as a chaplain. Even if you weren't a police chaplain, I would imagine you've kind of walked through those experiences. For us, when you have encountered suicide, maybe on the job, help us, maybe not obviously gory details. That's not what I'm looking for. How do you walk into that? So maybe others who may hear this, if they have to walk through that, let's hope not. They do, because again, it seems like it's becoming more prevalent. How should they best walk through it so they can learn from you?
Yeah, it is. I get called out to suicides in our community fairly often. That's difficult for me. It's difficult for our officers. They see every kind of suicide, obviously gunshot wounds and hangings and all kinds of terrible things. Sometimes it's a little more gory than other times. Sometimes it's less so. It's always tragic and it's always difficult. The family always expresses that they're worse off. The letters almost always express that the family should be better off without the person. There's a basic miscommunication happening at the core of every suicide. Every time someone takes their life, they really believe that they're a burden. They believe that there's no hope, that everyone else would be happier without them. It is never true. It just isn't. Over and over again, we're comforting families that wish they could have communicated that. I think that that might be a small part of a solution. Would be to, if you're the family of someone who's struggling, if somebody seems depressed, if they suddenly, maybe they're not depressed, maybe suddenly they're feeling better, but they're also giving away all of their stuff. That's a clue. Okay, that's a red flag. In technical terms, that's called leakage. Nobody ever takes a human life, either murder or suicide, without leakage. There's always indications that you're about to do something that big. Someone who's been depressed, who suddenly has resolved that they're going to take their life, so they feel resolution, they feel a little bit better, they're a little bit more positive, they're giving away their stuff, they're having like, hey, will you take my pet? Will you take my, whatever, my collection of such and such? That's leakage, that's clues. If you see that kind of stuff, I mean, it's incumbent upon us to say, hey, this stuff doesn't matter. The cat and the baseball cards, these things don't matter to me. You matter to me. And I just can't imagine life without you. That's an incredibly good thing to communicate. And we should be communicating that all the time, whether you're seeing leakage or not. We should be communicating that to people we care about. Don't assume that they know. They may think that they're not valuable and that they just don't matter anymore. They think they're a burden. You need to communicate that no. It's not a burden to love somebody. I'm on the ride with you. I'll do whatever I need for you.
You mentioned finding notes, maybe a letter.
Yeah.
Obviously, that piqued my interest. The theme we're in right now, is that pretty commonplace where you'll come across very commonplace?
Yeah. Almost everybody writes a note. Sometimes it's a literal, scrap of paper note they leave right next to them. They sometimes put it in their pocket or pin it to themselves. Other times, more commonly in recent years, they'll write an email. The note isn't visibly apparent, but once you get into their phone or their computer, they've written a note to people, feel a need to express themselves. Sometimes it's just instructions. Hey, take care of this, take care of this, take care of that. Goodbye. Other times it's a cry for help. It's hey, I want to feel better. I hate that I'm a burden. I hate that I am in the spot that I'm in. They're wanting some connection with the people around them. And not every attempt on someone's life is successful. Sometimes they survive it. I sometimes wonder about the notes in those cases, if they knew that the method they're using might not be final, that they might survive it and be able to talk to the people they wrote the note to. I'm not sure. It varies. The ones I get called to are usually the ones where the person does die. In that case, we're finding a note that was their final communication. Tragic, and it's difficult. And it's like I said, it's hard on the detectives. It's hard on the CSI people. The CSI people usually find the note, have to take a photo of it, which means they read it. And that's a trauma on those officers.
I'm thinking of a young lady right now, and I didn't know her mom. Every year they do a run for her. It's called Run for Grace. Her name was Grace. Her mom was my cross-country coach. We interviewed Susan kind of our first couple of years out of podcasting. I don't know if she left a note. I've never asked that question. I've wanted to now, especially in this series that we're in. Being a chaplain, you put your pants perhaps the same way I put on mine. Do you jump in? Yes. That's what I do. I don't know if anyone else does that. I totally do that.
From the second story.
All right, fair enough. I'm only on the first floor still, so I'm not graduated to second story. Help me in this moment, and again, maybe others, as a family member, as a friend, as an acquaintance even. How should we walk into those death moments? It seems like, again, you have experience with this, and I want to lean into that experience. Again, not that you're quote unquote an expert per se, but you've walked through it enough. I feel like you can kind of speak to that. Help us be better people in a death moment, that maybe some ways where you're like, you know what, in my early years, man, I made these mistakes. Don't say these things.
That's important. Been with probably hundreds of families in this moment, whether it was a suicide or an accident, homicide or whatever. The temptation is to talk too much. The best thing you can do is just sit with the person, suffer through the trauma with them. Don't try to explain it. Don't try to articulate something pithy that's going to make a big difference and be memorable. The harder you try to do that, the worse it'll go. So very rarely is there anything for you to say that would be good. Now, there's a lot of things you can say that would be bad. When you're there with somebody as they're finding out, as they're receiving this traumatic news of a loss, there's just so many bad things to say. You can say something like, God needed another angel. Oh my goodness. Are you saying that God killed their loved one? What in the world are you saying? I mean, maybe your theology makes that happen, but mine doesn't. Yikes. Don't say things like that. Don't say they're in a better place. I know what you mean by that. Actually means something really positive. You're talking about heaven, and you just have to be careful about these platitudes. Indicate that this is better. This is better that my loved one died. No, it's not. You say these things meaning well. They're almost always terrible. There's a bunch of them. There's a lot of, I'm sure she's happier now, and you're trying to put a smile on it. And this doesn't deserve a smile. This is difficult. Let it be hard. Don't try to fix it. Any attempt to fix it belittles it. Don't belittle someone's trauma. Don't belittle their loss. Suffer it with them. We're going to sit here and you can say you're sorry. You can say that you love them, and then shut up. That is maybe the best thing you can do for someone, especially if you're not the primary person, if you're not the spouse or the parent, neighbor, cousin. If you're coming in and there's people who are closer to the deceased than you are, then just shut your mouth and be present. Go fix some food. They probably won't want to eat. It's a nice gesture. That's better than trying to say something wise and profound. You're only going to screw it up.
I think it's hard too in suicides, like you said, especially for me that loves to talk.
Yeah.
And hates silence. Radio background guy that you are, we're taught young in these broadcast moments that dead air space. No, we don't want dead air. Yeah. In real life, dead air can be okay. Dead air being the silence.
It's preferable. Yeah, I'm a professional talker on several levels. I work in a church, podcaster. I am a chaplain. I do counseling and teaching and preaching and that kind of stuff. I'm a professional talker. And I go into those situations, and it doesn't have to even be a death. You could just be with somebody who found out that they have stage 4 cancer in the hospital. You know what? That is not the time for you to pontificate. You need to just be there. Just sit with them. People who are grieving, whatever kind of grief it is, just be with them. And that is so hard for those of us who talk. The less you talk, the better.
As we've talked about your involvement in the police department and seeing, again, them at their best, their worst, and maybe even their ugliest in moments like this, I think death is very ugly. So that's why I'm saying it that way. Is there a moment or maybe a police officer, and again, you don't have to necessarily give names, where they walked away with a different perspective after sitting with you that maybe you helped in a way that really gave them some encouragement where they're like, wow, okay, I can now go out and face tomorrow some counsel or some advice that you gave them?
Oh, I would love to tell you that I've had all these slam dunk home run moments where I said exactly the right thing or did exactly the right thing, and it transformed their lives. And like a butterfly emerging from the cocoon, they were a new person. That doesn't happen very often. That happens in movies and TV shows. And in reality, being a police chaplain means having a ministry of presence. So I'm making these little investments 1,000 times, 10,000 times in order to get that payoff. Hitting the home run, it's not even a single. No, if we could reinvent a version of baseball where you could bunt to 1/10 of the way to first base and then bunt again to 2/10 of the way to first base. Don't know if that would work or what that game would look like, but that's what it's like being a chaplain. I show up at the police station many times, just like with people in trauma. I don't say anything. I just show up and I'm there and they see that I'm there, and I don't have to be there because I'm a volunteer. I'm not paid to be there. I'm not selling them anything. I'm not gaining anything from them. I just keep showing up. And I'm there at the station when they're starting their shift, or maybe I go on a ride along with them, or I go out on a scene and I'm present when they're going through difficult things. And then I'm there the next time and the next time and the next time. Eventually, they start to get the message that I care about them and that people in our community care about them because I'm representing all those people in the community that really do care. They deal with a tiny fraction of a percent of our population that are breaking the law and hurting other people. They deal with the worst of the worst on their worst day. The rest of society is happy and healthy and doing positive things, and they're building and producing and being positive, but they never interact with the police. It's the people who are hurting people who interact with the police. And so I show up and show, hey, I care about you. I'm invested in you. If you want to talk, I'm a helper that knows you by name. You don't have to go to a stranger when you feel distraught, when you feel upset, when you are having trouble at home. You can come to me because I've been around you 10,000 times. And that's the little by little investment that starts to open up, I hope, a new door for them. Instead of bottling it up and feeling like they can never ask for help, or feeling like their only way to ask for help is to go to a stranger, to go to some psychiatrist they've never met before. And they're worried if they start telling all the horrible things they saw on the street, they'll make the psychiatrist run out the door screaming because of how scary or awful it was. I've been there and I've seen what they've seen. I've smelled what they've smelled. I've shared in the trauma with them. I sat quietly with them while they went through some of the hard things. And I might be one option some of them will choose after they've seen me over and over and over again.
I worked for a company. It's an internet company. And it's called Spectrum. I think they're in most states. Yeah. In one of the sales trainings that I had to sit through and endure, and it was a long day of sales trainings, the presenter said, you have to earn the right. And immediately I was like, what? Hold on a second. And so I just kind of woke up a little bit from the sleep that I was trying to go into.
The training fatigue.
Exactly. Yeah. I think we've all been there. And she said it again. She said, you have to earn the right. And I was like, okay, all right. There's twice. And again, kind of like nodding off, dozing off, not paying attention because it's virtual. And nowadays it seems like everything's virtual. And then she said it a third time. And she said, it's so important that we earn the right in people's lives, that if we don't earn the right, we can't speak into that. And then I was like, okay, whoa, now you're talking my language. I love what you're saying there. I'm hearing in that moment with you that exact thing that she was describing. You have to earn the right. I walked into the police station with my Tar Heel stuff on. First off, I'd probably stand off, especially in Kansas City. Let's just be honest.
Yeah, this is Jayhawk country.
Exactly. Yeah. They would be like, get the heck out of here. Take your Roy Williams and go. Yeah. Oh, wait, we did that. Sorry. All right. This is my Kansas Jayhawk joke for you. I haven't earned the right to come in and talk to them. I haven't even earned the right to go up to a random police officer in my community and say, hey, Officer Johnson, how are you, man? I'm here for you.
Yeah.
And start talking to him. Hey, tell me about all your woes and tell me about all the stuff you're carrying around and tell me about when you go home at night and how you're fighting those demons and fighting off how to get rid of all those images that you just saw today with people at their worst. Tell me all about that. That's not going to happen.
Nope.
How should we be approaching our police officers that you've seen people do and maybe that you do to make them be successful and maybe not, again, getting to their inner core of a police officer? I think we have zero respect for police. When we see them coming, we're like, ugh, what did I do? And I see all these videos going live and virtual and, viral of people being mean to them. And I'm like, do you know what they're going through? I don't think we do.
I highly recommend that people do ride-alongs. And most agencies will allow a civilian to do a ride-along. And you don't have to do the entire shift. You can put in 2, 3, 4 hours of riding in the car with a police officer. It is eye-opening. Most people who've done it say that's the moment that I understood. That was a revelation to me. I thought I knew from watching TV shows. I did not know. It wasn't until I was in the car and I could feel the danger of coming up behind somebody on a car stop or walking up to a house where it might be a domestic situation where there's violence and you really don't know, is a bullet going to come through this door or is it going to be a sweet little grandmother who opens the door? You really don't know which extreme it's going to be. Tension is not real until you felt it yourself. And so being with a police officer, which is 99% of the time really, really safe, that's still, that 1% is more danger than most of us ever experience in our lives. Until you felt it yourself, you can't understand. And so going on a ride along is something that most agencies will allow almost anybody to do. You have to sign up for it. There's a lot of paperwork, but you can do it. And I recommend that. I think that's a good idea for people who are not so sure if they trust the police and they think the police are idiots. Go on a ride along and see how careful these officers are. See how conscientious they are. See how concerned about your civil rights they are. I mean, these guys, it's really impressive because they have power that they don't abuse 99.999% of the time. That's remarkable because if you put the rest of us in that spot, we'd probably abuse that power left and right. For these officers to do so well so often and to endure the difficult and traumatic and stressful environments they endure, that's something you should see firsthand. The other thing I'd recommend is that before you just, well, I love police officers and I want to help them. If you're not going to do what I was describing a police chaplain does, where it's that ongoing investment of, I'm going to be there 10,000 times to show that I care. Can't give that amount of time. If that's not what you're called, a lot of people decide, well, it's Christmas time. I'll send a tub of popcorn or I'll send a pizza or something to the police station. And that's how I'll show them that I love them. And I tell you what, cops love popcorn and pizza. That's great that you're doing that. You might want to ask what they want instead of assuming. They're living in a different world. And in a lot of departments, the average police department is a small department, which means they have a very limited budget. You might find out that in your department, there's some piece of equipment, maybe a really convenient radio earpiece, or even in some cases, the ballistic panel that goes inside of a bulletproof vest. Those are like $1,000 a pop. And some departments, the officers have to buy that themselves. What if you, instead of sending pizza, what if you raised $1,000 each year so that each new officer coming into your small town could have a nice high-end ballistic panel in his vest that would make him and his family feel better? Maybe that's a better thing to do. Or maybe if you asked, you would find out that there's a single mom working as a cop and she could really just use daycare scholarship. If you could pay for a month of daycare for her, that would be huge. That would be what that department needs. And that'd be way better than just sending another pizza or another tub of popcorn. There might be something like that, but you would never know until you ask. And some departments have very specific needs like that would make a huge difference to those officers. And they would be so grateful. You would have to ask in your specific town what it is they need.
I love that, Jared. Thanks so much for that. Here's my question. I think everyone's wanting to know, why you? Why get involved? Listen, to me, it seems exciting. To me, it seems like, well, it's just natural. Like maybe you're like, I want to go find out more about that. I mean, I've been there myself, and it sounds like you maybe are from that same kind of family or that core of people that are like, that doesn't look right. Let's go ask the why over there. You could have easily stayed in your little church office, wearing your church polo, going to the golf course, yucking it up with your buddies. Hey, what's the exegesis about today?
Hey, good job.
Like, let's all be like Jesus today and just stay in the comforts of the air-conditioned church.
Yeah.
But why get involved?
God has a sense of humor, and he kept putting cops in my church. And I'm not from a law enforcement family, and I'm not from a military family. We're right here by Fort Leavenworth, so we have military officers all over the place. This is where they come to go to school. We got a lot of majors and lieutenant colonels. Just, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a lieutenant colonel in this area. Then there's a lot of police officers, a smattering of firefighters. And I didn't understand how different their lives were. I don't go to a job that could kill me. Those people all have those jobs, and they also have something different. I didn't go to a job where I swore an oath to potentially give my life for a stranger. I've never done that. And they all have. And their spouses know that they have. And their children know that they have. And that changes everything. And I didn't appreciate it. I didn't understand it. It was alien to me. I'm just a happy civilian living in ignorance. I kept having these people around me. And over the years, I eventually befriended them. In fact, some of my best friends are police officers. That opened my eyes. I think the tipping point for me was death notifications. I found out that these young police officers, a 28-year-old detective has to go to a person's house at 5 o'clock in the morning, knock on their door, and tell them that their teenager was killed in a car wreck last night. That's why they didn't come home. That's horrible. And for that 28-year-old who's maybe just had his first child or something, not at all ready to deal with that kind of processing something that big in life. Well, I'm a minister at a church. I do funerals all the time. I thought, you know what? I could do that. Let me take that. I'm 20 years older. I'm more experienced. I can't do all of the other things cops do. I could do that part. I started looking into it, and I got training. I went through the process of coming on as a chaplain. There's a chaplain association here in Kansas City. So I had a group that I had to join, and then I had to be background checked by the police department and fingerprinted by the sheriff's office and all this other stuff. I went through those steps primarily to do the death notifications. And I actually teach death notifications now at the police academy. And that's something, in fact, I did one this week. I went to tell somebody that their 40-something-year-old son in another state had died of an overdose. And that was heartbreaking. I would rather take that on than make these police officers do that when they already have so many other stressful things. That was the impetus. And it turns out I loved counseling police officers. I loved riding in the car with them. I loved doing all sorts of other stuff. I really felt useful going to a homicide and talking to the family of the victim and explaining why their loved one who was shot on the front porch is still laying on the front porch 3, 4, 5 hours later. Because they feel like it's disrespect. Like, why are you disrespecting? I can see them up there behind the yellow tape. Why are they still laying there? And you need to move my loved one. Why don't you care about my child? Let me come and be the liaison between the police department and the family and explain that it's not that we're disrespecting them. We're showing them the utmost respect because we're going to not just take pictures, we're going to scan the entire front porch and the yard and the street with this laser scanning system. And everything is going to be captured in a computer. Every hair, every grain of sand is going to be in the computer system so we can recreate the entire scene in 3D for a jury and for our investigators so that your loved one can have justice. And we can't give their life back to them, but we can bring you justice. So this is out of respect that we're taking hours to process the scene. That needs to be communicated to a traumatized family. Sometimes a person in a police uniform with a gun on their hip is not the right person to say that.
On a weird level, it makes me think of my job. I work in an auto body shop, and we have technicians.
Yeah.
We have technicians in the back that their whole job is to put cars back together again when they're broken and they're destroyed. And I've heard our technicians talk. They should not be up front. They should not. I invoke Office Space right now. I talk to the people so the technicians don't have to.
Yes.
That
actually is a very good analogy.
I'm not saying anything against our cops. Our church has, I think, at least 4 or 5, I think, in our church community. I think they've done all types of police work. I think some have done school police work. I think some have done beat cop work. I think some are sergeants and know all the nuances.
Investigations and whatever else.
Perhaps, yes. for me, again, I go back to this idea that, I mean, maybe it's my own show. You're literally trying to put yourself, not figuratively, but literally trying to put yourself in their shoes, in their experiences. And to me, I think there's nothing more powerful when an individual says, you know what, I'm going to go learn what it is to be them. I'm going to go learn what it is. You didn't necessarily come in with, okay, here's Jared's 5-step process on how I'm going to be the best person ever. It truly was, I'm going to learn from them and I'm going to bring my skill set to them to fill a need that they have. Like you're talking about with taking care of them, not just with pizza and popcorn, solid level of, hey, is there an equipment need that I can fill? I mean, that was brilliant, by the way. I really love that. You talk about the trauma that they've walked through, that, again, they're seeing people on their worst day, at their worst moment, and it's day in and day out, 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, however long their shift may be. And you're maybe in those moments with them as well. How do you not allow that to come over you? How do you allow that trauma and that ugliness not affect you and your family?
Well, I thought that it wasn't. I'm in my mid 40s and I come from a very stable family. I've been married for almost 30 years. I just have a very stable, very healthy, great support network. I felt like I was doing great. I was seeing a lot of dead bodies and experiencing a lot of trauma and a lot of secondary trauma. Felt like, I'm handling it well. I don't ever dream about these dead bodies or anything, and the homicides and suicides and car accidents and whatever. That doesn't seem to be bothering me at all until it did. And I was actually visiting my in-laws in Kentucky, and we were watching television. It was just a summer afternoon. We were actually watching The Chosen. We were watching that Jesus TV show. It was nothing to do with anything. My in-laws, just a little thing on them. She's a retired doctor. He's a retired construction worker. And they love to watch British murder mysteries. And so most of the time we're with them, we're watching British people kill each other, and we're asking, did the butler do it? That is what they love. And you would think that would trigger me. You would think that would be, oh, look, they discover a dead body in the garden or in the, in the atrium or whatever, that would be what would trigger me. And it didn't at all. No, it was watching Jesus be kind to people and give them really good hugs like he does in that TV show. That, for some reason, I started crying. It got uncontrollable. And then I had, for the first time in my life, I had an intrusive thought where I saw the dead body of a woman. And it was not the most recent dead body. It was not the worst dead body. It's been a year. I still don't know why that woman's dead body was as visible to me as the television screen. And I had to tell everybody, my kids were there, my wife was there. I had to tell them, look, I've got to stop. I need a break, because they could tell I was getting emotional, but I wasn't recovering. And so, like, you guys go jump on the boat and go spend some time on the lake. I'm going to go take a walk in the woods and make some phone calls. And so I called a friend up in Detroit. I called another friend in Los Angeles. I spent a couple hours, basically spent the afternoon talking to them and explaining, this is what's happening to me. This is why I don't feel like I'm in control. Here's what I think it might be about. What do I need to do? And they walked me through what was happening to me and how the trauma had built up and why it was coming out the way that it was, and helping me not feel so ashamed. And it's still, I say ashamed, it took me several months before I told anybody. I've only been telling this story for like the last 6 months, and it happened to me a year ago. It took me a while to realize it's okay that I needed to ask for help and that I was vulnerable. I didn't want to admit that. I thought people would think less of me or not want me to help them if I needed help. And oh my goodness, that's exactly what my police officers go through. That's why they don't ask for help. That's why they don't admit that they're suffering. They just bottle it up and hope it'll go away. It's been eye-opening, and I've not yet had anybody treat me badly for it. Most people are very encouraging and very reaffirming that, hey, we understand what you went through. We can't imagine it. We respect you for saying something about it. It's been nothing but positive. It was extremely difficult to admit that I needed help and that something was bothering me that much.
Thanks for sharing that. I want to acknowledge that too. I haven't been around too many women's groups. I know this may come as a shock to some. I really haven't. I've been around a lot of men's groups though through the years, and it does seem very annoying to me. Absolutely nails on the chalkboard, eating peas and bananas. Those are my annoying things. Onions on stuff that doesn't need onions. Super annoying. It seems very almost angry when I hear of a guy say, I don't want to share because I don't want people to look at me differently. It's like, that's why we're here. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
That is why we're here. Well, it was 2 a.m. and I was in a men's group one time and we're talking about purity and pure thoughts and keeping our thoughts captive. This guy said, hey man, it was 2 a.m. I was scared. I was vulnerable and I was going to go look at porn. I said, why didn't you call somebody? Well, it's 2 a.m, man. I didn't want to wake anybody up. I was like, cool. So you want to admit to your wife the next morning what happened?
Yeah.
No, not that you're anything special, Jared. I mean, you are. You're created by the king. So you are special in that respect. Special, you don't have special powers as far as I know. For you to recognize that, for you to make those phone calls, to me, that's more exciting to me about your story, that you were vulnerable enough to step back and say, I need help. That's one thing. Okay, great. High five there. Think you take it a step further when you actually make that phone call, when you're practicing what you kind of preach in some respects.
Yes. Yep. Taking my own medicine.
Exactly. Yep. And I just think there's power in that. There's power in that. If somebody is in that moment with you and they're like, you know what? I don't have the Jared I can call. I don't have the Jim Harbaugh, only because he used to be in Michigan. So I'm using him as the guy you called. Now he's out in LA, so that's perfect too, because he went from Detroit roughly Detroit to LA. I don't have that guy I can call. What would be your counsel to somebody in that moment?
Well, you always have someone you can call. There's a national line that now has a number, just like 911. It's 988. That's what we used to call the suicide or crisis lifeline. That 988 number, you can call it, you can text it 24 hours a day, anywhere in the country. In the United States. Other countries have similar programs where you can call a number. There's trained counselors who are just waiting to talk to you. This is what they do, and they understand. And you're not the first one. You're not alone. You're not unique. Your story is unique. Your circumstance isn't. Lots of people have been in this same spot. There are people waiting to talk to you, eager to help. The reason they're doing this is because they've been there. They had a plan. They were giving their stuff away. They were ready to take their own life, and somebody intervened. Maybe they reached help. Maybe someone reached out to them. That's why they're here today, to help you. So that is absolutely available. We also underestimate the people in our life that actually do care about us. We assume that we're a burden. We assume that we're a nuisance. And hey, maybe you've been annoying. You're not a nuisance. You're not unvaluable to them. They care about you, and you really should try to reach out. I understand that sometimes as people close to us fail us and disappoint us, there's often more. A lot of people who are friends and helpers that would love to take care of you and love to give you some help. I said, I've seen some suicide counseling from police officers with total strangers, where that police officer, he knows what it's like to go through something traumatic. He knows what it's like to suffer. He gets called out to somebody standing on the side of the bridge, and he'll go out there and he'll talk with you and he'll spend that time with you. Those police officers care about you. And so there's always somebody to call. Certainly don't write off all of the obvious ones like your friends and family. They actually care about you more than you think.
That's my takeaway, is there is always someone to call. I've said for years, I don't care who it is, call me. I'm nothing special. Again, I'm just a child of the king. I would sit with someone in that pain. And I think if you think that you don't have someone, that's the most dangerous spot to be in. I think
it's a lie that we are willing to tell ourselves, that I'm totally alone. No one cares about me. That's a lie. That's a lie designed to destroy you. Don't believe it, because it could destroy you.
Absolutely, it could. What is the best way if somebody wants to maybe learn more about some of the training that you've walked through, some of the experiences that you've walked through? What's the best way that they can maybe connect with you to carry this conversation further?
I produce a podcast called Hey Chaplain. Hey Chaplain, H-E-Y Chaplain. Hey Chaplain is a podcast. It's not necessarily a religious podcast. It's a podcast about my experience as a police chaplain. I interview police officers from LAPD to Scotland Yard all around the world. They share their wisdom, primarily directed at other police officers. So the show is for police officers. Thousands of people listen to it who aren't cops, because it's interesting. And listening to a cop talk about his career is many times applicable to your career, whatever it may be. Hey Chaplain is, a show I produce. It comes out weekly. You can learn a lot and gain a lot. It's interesting people talking about interesting topics. In the show notes of that show, there's an email address. You can email me, and I would be happy to talk to you. And if you're interested in law enforcement chaplaincy or first responder chaplaincy to help our firefighters or police officers, then I might be able to point you in the right direction to some of the regional and national groups that train you for this kind of stuff. or how to transition from the training you do have to specifically law enforcement. That's a difficult jump if maybe you work in a hospital or a prison or some other place. To actually go to law enforcement chaplaincy is a little bit of its own animal, and I can help you with that transition.
I love that a lot. Well, again, Jared, thanks so much for hanging out with us today. Really appreciate what you gave and what you shared. Always valuable, and appreciate you. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
All right, guys and gals, kids and campers alike. That is it. That is all. That is, in fact, our show today. So here's my question as we go. What about you? I remember... I'm embarrassed to admit this. I remember my very first traffic stop. Story time. I was working at a place called Red Robin. It's a restaurant. I think most people know it. Yum. I was working there with a buddy of mine. We were cleaning the bar. No, we were not old enough to be in said bar at Red Robin. It's 2 a.m. I flip an illegal U-turn. I get pulled over. And I remember the cop walking up to my window, and I thought, oh my God, my parents are going to kill me. How am I going to explain this ticket to my parents? And he was so gracious and so kind. He said, son, where are you going? I said, I don't know. I'm on my way home, I think. But I don't know where I was going. I got turned around. I just started driving. And he said, okay, it's all right. Let me help you, though. Don't do that again. Don't make that turn again. That's an illegal U-turn. It's not okay. You could hurt somebody. You could have actually killed them by the way you did that. I was like, okay, all right. 2 weeks later, I got pulled over again. Same cop, by the way. Tells you how small our community is. I missed my turn, so I backed up in the road. Again, early in the morning. I should not be driving. Same guy, same result. He told me, you know what? It's okay. Let's try it again. And so, guys, I want to share that with you just to say sometimes we have to stop, we have to reset, we have to try it again. So maybe for you, this cop experience has never been a good one. Maybe you've had some really bad experiences with it. But I'm going to ask you this question as we go. What are they walking through? What are they experiencing? What trauma have they seen today? And maybe give them a smile. If they're willing, maybe even shake their hand and say thank you. Because they're doing some jobs that none of us would want to do. Again, seeing people at their worst moments sounds exciting on the surface, but when you get into it, not that exciting. Very scary. Remember that as we get out of here. Remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. Thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned till next week when we walk in other people's shoes.